All right, so we're ready for our very last session. And for this last session, we have two faculty from here in WSU Tri-Cities. I'm going to introduce both of them now, and then they will do their presentations consecutively. So first is Chad Kruger. Chad Kruger is the director of WSU's Center for Sustaining Agriculture and Natural Resources and serves as assistant director for agriculture, extension, and outreach at the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures. We had ribbon cutting early October, right, for that, right, Anya? He has also led or contributed to numerous USDA, EPA, DOE, and state-funded projects on climate change, energy, and agriculture. Following him will be Dr. Yonas Demissie. Dr. Demissie is an associate professor of civil and environmental engineering here at WSU and assistant director for environment and engineering at WSU's Institute for Northwest Energy Futures. And his research focuses on hydroclimatology and the intersection of water, climate, and energy systems, emphasizing clean energy production while reducing environmental impacts, particularly on water resources.
All right, thank you. So this afternoon, what Yonas and I are going to do is introduce you to the new Institute for Northwest Energy Futures. Our fearless leader, Noel Schultz, is actually getting on a plane, and so we're kind of covering for her in the first part of this. And then I'll talk specifically about the agricultural role that I'm involved in, and then Yonas will wrap it up talking about implications from the water perspective. And one of the things that we've definitely talked about is these systems. We need to take a systems approach because the systems interact with each other, and therefore when you make a decision in one area, it affects everything else that's happening. So one of the things that we're doing at WSU is really trying to garner some coordination and organization of WSU's energy expertise. And we've talked about this as the context of an energy ecosystem. And INEF was really created in part to kind of create something of an umbrella over a lot of WSU's energy work. And what we learned, and not a single one of us actually knew this, is there's over 26 different entities at WSU that work in some dimension of energy. And many of us have none of us actually knew that other 25, but the groups have never actually gotten together until very recent. So what INEF is trying to do is develop and implement a roadmap for clean energy systems approach in the Tri-Cities area, Washington and beyond, provide research support, develop needed workforce, and leverage the region's energy hub with WSU's unique research, education, and extension resources, and growing partnerships with industry and PNNL. So we are headquartered here out of the Tri-Cities campus, but we're part of the WSU system. And many of you probably have seen maps like this, and the 26 different entities, if you click the link there, you can actually go look at each of those entities. We got all of those groups here together in Tri-Cities in early October, had basically an afternoon of brainstorming with them, and really kind of there was a lot of, no pun intended, but energy in terms of the potential for collaboration across these different groups. So what do those areas of work look like within the larger WSU energy ecosystem? A ton of work in the food, energy, water nexus, which is really where I'm at. A ton of work in the generation, power grid, and load management. And then a lot of work also in biofuels, including sustainable aviation fuels. And this is another interesting one. Just within this group, which I've been working in for over 20 years, we actually do everything from genetics to sustainable aviation fuel testing at WSU. It's probably the only place in the world that everything like that happens. And our groups have never even sat together and talked to each other before that day. And so, and then the last kind of cluster of activities are really around system perspectives. How do these things come together? So just a little bit of introduction of me and what I do within the Institute. I am an ag guy. That is kind of my background. I'm multi-generational farm families and came up, and this is what I do. But the things that have always interested me are climate, energy, and water as they relate to agriculture. So even going back to my graduate work was really looking at some of these questions and how do they work together, and ultimately the question of how do we encourage and influence adoption of new practices and new technologies within agriculture. Washington State is a really cool place to work on that kind of thing, because our ag industry is about as forward-looking and progressive as you can find it. Very well capitalized in many cases, a lot of high-value crops that we grow that we then process and put all over the world. The other big issue in terms of agriculture in this state is it co-developed with our hydropower system. So a lot of people don't realize that, or it gets lost in the mix, but really it was the desire to irrigate that was more important than the desire for electrons first. And they did co-develop, and they've largely been attached for that whole period of time. And the really important thing is agriculture has been and is still, in food processing and packing and cold storage, one of the largest energy users in the state. One of the things we're seeing that's hitting agriculture in the state, particularly because we produce high-value crops that get turned into high-value products that get sold to big retailers who then have to sell to customers all over the world, is our industries are being told they need to decarbonize. So you want to sell an apple to Walmart, you want to sell a French fry to McDonald's, you have to be responsive to those marketplaces, and those marketplaces are asking right now, what's your carbon footprint? Or telling our industries, you need to reduce your emissions by 30% by 2030 or 100% by 2050. How are you going to do that? So in my other role, I spent a lot of time working on what can we do to help our farmers and ranchers reduce their emissions through agricultural practices. But the reality is, we're not going to get there just on farm. The only way we can actually truly come down to the potential for like zero carbon food system is to actually integrate the energy questions in it. And so all of a sudden energy on the farm becomes the same problem as energy across the economy. So here we've got, the plug-in hybrid electric, and Noel likes to talk about, everybody thinks that when you plug in that hybrid electric vehicle, you're going to get clean electrons. I want to plug in my hybrid electric tractor and get clean electrons because I need to sell to Walmart from my orchard. Well, they want a zero carbon piece of fruit. Okay? So we've got the same problem, and that problem is one where we're competing if we're not thinking strategically about how do we do this together. So I'm going to jump to the place where we've had the most success in agriculture. This was actually the first project that INEF was involved in, and that's this idea of agricultural symbiosis. So we're a big processing state. So we take a lot of food or crops that we produce, we bring them to process. Tri-Cities is the mecca of processing in the state. And out of that processing, we put a lot of energy in, we put a lot of water in to get to that point, and we get great high-value products that we ship all over the world, but we also have waste products. And we also have other parts of the agricultural production world that generate waste. One of my favorite wastes is manure. I kind of grew up learning how to deal with it. And what we've learned is all of those wastes are rich in carbon, they're rich in nutrients, they're rich in water. And if we're thinking about them much more strategically, we could be looking at those as a resource base to build on. So instead of importing a whole bunch of fertilizers from all over the world, instead of overusing water or things like that, we can look at this idea of ag symbiosis, which is basically industrial symbiosis in an ag and food environment. Where can we take the waste materials from farms or food processors and make those the inputs for other parts of the agriculture and food system? And so INEF was awarded some funds from the state legislature to actually initiate a study to kind of say, put some perspective on this issue. What is the opportunity in Washington State? And so we produced this report in 2023, and then there's a group of legislators that have really taken it up. They've actually visited some places in Denmark where there's some real advanced work like this. So what it really looks like is it's adding value for agricultural businesses by enabling them to reduce their costs or generate new revenues by sharing their surplus resources, energy, water, organic waste, carbon. And the really cool thing is we've got a number of good examples of this actually happening. And you're going to see some maps from Yonas and me today, and you're going to notice there's some real concentration of effort right here in the Tri-Cities area and the greater Columbia Basin area. And so what these are is the dark blue points are operational ag symbiosis projects that we found, and basically we define those processes is they had to be trading multiple things. It couldn't just be like taking manure and making energy out of it. You actually had to be taking manure and something else and making energy and something else from those. And we have a whole bunch of those that are operating. And in fact, several of these projects I've been involved in, this one right here was the very first one in the state, and I actually helped them get that going 20 years ago. So lots of those that are going, a number more that are in active development, and many of these are at a scale that dwarfs the scale of the first ones that went into play. The other thing is, if you start looking at our large-scale primary ag processors, here they are concentrated, and in many cases they're concentrated right on top of each other, like here in the Tri-Cities area. So there's real good opportunity. And another one is there's a public data around where public cold storage is, which is another big piece of the ag and food system. And there's a lot of opportunity and need there. So one of our biggest energy users in ag and food is cold storage, because we're trying to make our products last throughout the year, so I can sell you an apple in August. Looking at the big picture of agriculture in the state, this is the big picture too. So all of the blue or yellow is ag lands in the state. And you can see the vast majority of them are in eastern Washington. There's some pretty important ag lands up here in the Skagit and the Whatcom area, but really it's over here. And this is cropland. The blue area is our irrigated agricultural lands. And you can see why it's all concentrated. Why are all those processors right here? It's because the irrigation's here. And again, I said it was co-developed with the hydropower system. And that's because hydropower or electricity, water, and agriculture do go together. They're really a symbiotic thing. The interesting thing about this, and this kind of gets us into this work, is when you start thinking about the clean energy system in agriculture and how agriculture can come together, if we're going to decarbonize agriculture, it's got to be part of the solution too. It can't just be, we produce things, it gets sold, and then we figure out how else, we're going to buy back clean energy. But all of this ag land could potentially be involved in part of that solution. And so one of the things that one of my tree fruit colleagues and I have been working on is this idea that we could take solar and deploy it in agriculture in ways that actually make a lot of sense and a lot of money sense. If you hear the word agrivoltaics, the idea is you put solar panels over a crop or over a pasture or over something like that, and potentially you're getting two uses of the same land. A lot of the work that's been done in that space historically has really been from the perspective of, well, can you put solar over a piece of ground and not hurt the production too much so that it's worth doing? But we asked the question, are there situations under which if you deployed solar over the top of a crop, or in other cases over the top of a livestock production system, do you actually create a significant financial benefit to the crop? And guess what? You can, and there's reasons we know this. So this picture here is basically our orchards and vineyards in the state. This is orchards and vineyard lands. There's about 300,000 acres of orchard and vineyard land. We're going to take apples just as the starter, because this is the big apple state. We're the biggest apple producer in the world. Some of those apples are really high value apples that, like Honey Crisp or Cosmic Crisp that WSU released a few years ago. And all of those really high value apples tend to be very susceptible to something called abiotic stress. So anytime the temperature gets above 90 degrees, sun's hitting the canopy, hits an apple, and it actually gives the apple sunburn. And you don't see that necessarily in the orchard. So you go and you spend all the money to grow that fruit, harvest that fruit, then you take it in and you put it in cold storage, and 6 months later you pull that fruit out of cold storage, warm it up to sell it, and half of it goes bad. And it goes bad, it looks like rot, but basically it's physiological damage from sunburn. And several of my colleagues up in Wenatchee are working on ways to try and assess and figure out, can we figure out what's caused or where sunburn is and try and catch that early and not lose that fruit. But one of the most important things they've figured out they could do is they could put shade cloth over the top of the orchard and essentially reduce the amount of solar intensity hitting the apples. Problem is shade cloth's expensive. It's very difficult to manage, so you deploy it. Then if you want to pull it back, you have to go get a crew and pull it all back. Then it gets hit by hail and it's damaged and you got to replace it. So it's a pretty expensive thing. And you only want to do it in the most valuable situations. The other option, well, there's another option. One other option is you actually use a sunscreen product, but nobody really wants to mess with a sunscreen product on apples. And the third one is you use evaporative cooling, which uses a lot of water. So if you're in a place where you're water limited or water constrained, or if you could use that water for another productive purpose, you really don't want to be using that water for evaporative cooling. So we've got three approaches that we're using. All of them are relatively expensive to set up, and all of them have downsides to actual management or other ecosystem functions. The other one is you use that water, you actually get a lot more water in the soil, and actually you can create other physiological stresses in the apple. So this is a pretty big deal, and we've spent a lot of money trying to solve it. And so my colleague said, hey, could we put your solar panels over the orchard and do the same thing? And so we found that, yeah, you probably can do that. And we've actually partnered with a company that's got some artificial intelligence sensors to put in the tree canopy to help control the panels. We got some money from the Department of Commerce. We're actually doing this. We just signed the contract, hopefully today. We're going to put panels over the orchard, both an existing orchard so we can immediately answer the question of fruit quality for our industry, and also over a new planting, because that's how actually it would happen. So you'd probably have some kind of partnership between grower, landowner, and some other third party that would bring in the solar piece. This system would be optimized for fruit quality rather than energy production. But the interesting thing is about 50,000 acres of those three high-value apples, Honeycrisp, Granny Smith, and Cosmics that we're looking at, that's a lot of ground. And if we cover about 10,000 acres of it, that's worth about the generating capacity of Grand Coulee Dam. So we need to cover those orchards. Here's an idea that might make an actual lot of sense. If we can take our pack outs from 50% to 85%, we just made $15,000 an acre on the crop. So this is kind of thinking agrivoltaics in a way that actually makes a lot of sense. The other thing, and I'm going to go backwards one picture, if those orchards and the vineyards too are all in this area, what else is there? Our hydropower system, our transmission, our distribution, all of the demand for energy is in that same place. So instead of putting solar panels out here on my ranch where I'd have to figure out where am I going to take that energy and how am I going to get it there, we're actually going to put that power right into the system, right where it's used. The other thing, and we're looking at this question too, is, if Walmart's asking me, how do you get a zero carbon apple? Well, if I have a power source, my biggest carbon footprint in the orchard is actually pumping costs and diesel fuel. Well, I can immediately address the pumping costs by producing electrons, but if I have the option of converting, an orchard traction power to electric, that gives me a lot of opportunity to fairly quickly go to zero carbon in the whole orchard system. The other thing is this particular unit is being tested for autonomous management right now. As an orchardist, my number one cost is actually labor. So if I'm going to make this transformation, I'm going to make a transformation both from an energy perspective and a labor perspective at the same time. All of a sudden, this from a systems perspective starts to look really interesting. We don't know yet what the whole thing's going to cost. We got a lot of questions that have to be answered in terms of how would all this be integrated, but that's why INEF was created. So where I'll end and turn it over to Yonas is we're looking at these questions in the food, energy, water nexus. What are these trade-offs that could be looked at between energy and water versus irrigation and hydrogeneration? What is the energy demand and use for food growth and processing? We actually don't know the answer to that question. There's really no public source that's done that very well. And what would happen if we looked at particularly these high-value fruit systems from an electrification perspective? What could we potentially supply in terms of renewable energy that helps solve the larger problem that the state and region are looking for? And what could we do that helps really address the need from the industry and marketplace that's telling our agricultural producers they need to decarbonize? We're also looking at some other questions, and I'll turn it over at this point in time to Yonas.
Thanks, Chad. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you about our project that we have been working with Chad and about our passion relates to water and particularly relates to Colombia. Like I call it the jewel. It's a very amazing resource we have, lucky enough, that can address some of this major issue we are facing in terms of meeting the future energy demand. So my name is Yonas Demissie. I'm a faculty in civil and environment engineering. I've been in WSU for the past 10 years now, I think past 10 years. Yeah, that's my short background. So I use this. Okay, so the goal here is I'm going to talk about the interface between energy and water. So the many roles of water have in terms of energy production, energy transportations, and so on. And we'll focus on, I will zoom in into the Columbia River Basin, particularly how interplay with our energy production. Okay, so I will start with these questions. So whenever we think about electric production, most people, not necessarily in this area, what comes into mind is we may be thinking about coals, natural gas, nuclears, wind, and sun as a source of energy. Or we may even think about the carbon emission, given that energy is one of the major contributors to our greenhouse gas. So we may be thinking about the carbon issue. But how often do we think about the water aspect of energy? In our area, again, lucky enough, we have the Columbia River, so it's going to be hard to differentiate between energy and water. I don't see how we can talk about energy without having a good understanding of water. So we are lucky enough to see those direct relationship. So just to give you a perspective, so more than half of the water we divert from the streams, they are used for energy production, for cooling power plant, and for all other energy-related activities. This is more than what the Ag Center is using, so we use more water for energy production sectors than the Ag Center. So energy is really a key in terms of our current energy use, current energy production, and then our future energy needs. Just to give you, again, a better perspective, if you are producing electricity from coal or nuclear plants, you can imagine for 1 kilowatt hour of electricity you produce, we will draw about 20 to 60 gallons of water, right? So to produce just 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, we can, depending on what kind of cooling system we used, so we can draw about 20 to 60 gallons. And what that means is refrigerators, if the most efficient refrigerators can use about 0.5 kilowatts per hour. So you are using, so to run for 2 hours, so you will need about a minimum 20 gallons or 60 gallons of water. So embedded in that electricity, there is that amount of water used to run our refrigerators. The same with ovens. Oven can use about 2 to 5 kilowatts energy. So if you run the oven for 1 hour, so you are using 2 kilowatt, which means again about 40 gallons of water to cook or to use the oven for about 1 hour. So it's a major task or major demand or major use in our water resource. The same with hydroelectric power. It's not that different from coals or nuclears. Hydropower plant can evaporate about 18 gallons of water per every kilowatt of energy produced. Again, this is national average value. So we will use, again, if I run the ovens, I'm taking that much of water from our system. Another biofuel. Biofuel is also takes a lot of water for growing corn, for processing the fuels. And then to give you just an idea how it is related to other energy source, biofuel need a significant amount of water compared to hydro, oil, nuclear, and other sources. So again, water is really a key part of our energy production. Just to highlight this, one of the earlier study related to biofuel indicates that if we use a biofuel-driven car, you might end up driving, for every 1 mile, you might end up consuming about 50 gallons of water, because again, that water goes into the whole life cycle of producing that biofuel, which is in our tank. So again, this is something that really need to be highlighted whenever we come to policies or whenever we try to address a clean energy goals. And nowadays we are more moving to a hydrogen production, so we are talking about energy coming from hydrogen. And again, comparatively, you can see a recent study from Nature, it highlights the significant demand hydrogen may have on water, even compared to biofuels, coals, nuclears, and other sources. So if this is not clearly studied, it will impact the scale and the scope of the hydrogen production, because this is going to be a significant water need. So the sustainability side of this production will be a major concern moving forward. So what I would like to highlight is, I think we have a climate crisis, we have a climate issue, the carbon issue, but it's not just a carbon issue we have. We have also a resource issue. So the sustainability side is also equally important. Having a clear power source is one thing, but not on cost of compromising our sustainability. And particularly when it comes to water, water is one of the most scarce resources we have on the planet, and they are also interrelated. So the issue we have in water will be reflected on our energy goal, energy productions, and so on. So drought can affect our energy productions. For example, this is a reservoir in California, I think during the 2011-2018 drought, the reservoir is completely out. So you can't produce energy, again, unless we address that in the water, this integrated interdependence between the two systems. So this nexus approach is really key. So we need to understand their interrelationship, their interdependence. So water is needed for different energy activities. So hydropower, we need water for cooling, bioenergy, hydrogens, extraction, and we need also energy for water, desalination, waste treatments, and all kind of things. So we need to understand those interdependencies. Just to give you an idea, a typical city in the US, 30 to 40% of the energy consumption for that particular city goes for water treatment and distribution of water into the community. So it's a both in kind of game. So the water need energy, and the energy also need the water. Again, another highlight just to show you our energy sectors is the most intensive sector in terms of energy use, even compared to other industry. So producing energy consume more water than other industries. This is also to highlight that how important, again, these relations are. Just take an example of the 2021 drought in the west side. It impacts in our area about 14% of the power production. Hydropower is reduced because of that drought. In California, about 48, almost half percent, or almost 50% of the production is reduced because of that particular year drought. Just to look at it, the whole Columbia River dams, And these are actually the reduction in the power generation during the 2011, which is on average, each of them are reduced about 14% of their typical energy production. And another really classical example is the one which happened again in 2021, a winter storm in Texas. And that winter storm in Texas had a big blackout in the city. So this is on Monday. So I think they restore it in a couple of days. But that creates a lot of issue in terms of the water supply system. So there was a pipe bursting, frozen wells, offline treatment plant. And as a result of that, millions of residents will not able to get a clean water for drinking that lasts much more time than restoring the power. Okay, so that power is needed to supply our water. Again, our water is needed to generate the power. Okay, so with that, I will move to the Columbia River Basin, which really highlight this interdependency between water, energy, and ag, as Chad was talking. So I call it a powerhouse, which is a perfect example of energy-water nexus. Just to give you some numbers, the Columbia River Basin generates on average, about 22 million megawatt of power, which is about 40% of the US hydropower production, or about 90% of renewable energy power in the Northwest. So there is no clean energy without really understanding the role of the Columbia River will have currently and in the future. Again, to give you a better perspective, this power is about, you can use this to electrify about 18.1 million households in the US, which is about 54 Seattle-sized cities. So it's a huge amount of electricity produced from this natural resource. Again, to give you an idea what that means, I compare the power production compared to the major river in the US, Mississippi, Colorado, Tennessee, Missouri, Ohio, even Snake, and you can see the Colorado River dominates that power generation. And this is just a timeline. So most of this power production comes from those 14 federally owned dams, federally owned and operated dams. Army Corps and Bureau of Reclamation run those dams. And from those, this was a timeline showing you, so Grand Coulee. So they were built from 1930, I think 1975. And the color code is for the production, the million megawatt over the year. Again, just to give you another perspective, I rank the largest hydro dams in the US, and 5 of the dams, 5 of the 10 biggest dams in the US, again, are located in the Columbia River Basin. The Grand Coulee, Chief Joseph Dams, Johnny Day Dams, Dalles Dams, and Bonneville's Dam. So again, having this huge resource, this 5 bigger resource compared to the entire US river system, it shows you how much key this river is playing in terms of generating a clean energy. And then this power goes to, I think, about eight states in the western part of the US. BPA, the Bonneville Power Authority, run this operation. So it goes up to, I think, Nevada, California, but most of them, about 30% of the power generated, will stay in Washington. Oregon get about 25%, Idaho, and so on. So that power will distribute among different states. Another good aspect of this power is a reliable power source, especially compared to other renewable energy. So the one you see here are the different dams and their what we call is capacity factor, how often they operate at their full capacity. And as you see, most of the dams operate, I think, half of the time or above 50% of the time they are operating at their full capacity. This is compared to a global average for hydropower is about, the global average is about 44%, but Columbia River operates more than 50%. Wind, about 30% of the time, and then solar, about 25% of the time. So the Columbia River, again, can play at regulating those variations. So whenever the solar is not working, again, this is one of a reliable resource that can mitigate the power fluctuations. Okay, so it's just not only power, so it also provides a lot of water for ags. And these are the major irrigation projects in the Columbia Basin. One of them is the Columbia Basin Project, the CBP, which is about close to about 7,000 acres area. It's one of the biggest irrigation projects in the US, even maybe globally. And the next one is Snake, and then Yakima, and the Umatilla, and other projects. Again, to give you a perspective how big these projects are, I compare it to other irrigation projects in the US. The CBP, the Columbia Basin Project, is this much. And this is the All America Canal, which is the Central California project. Again, our area is bigger, and the Snake is even bigger. Again, we have 3 of those major projects in this basin compared to any other place in the US. It have significant economical values. This is from Bureau of Reclamations. So the CBP itself generates from irrigation crop about 2.66 billion annual income for the region, 2.67 related industry, power generation, flood controls, and tourism and recreations. And this is the Yakima Basin. It's another big project. Again, crop-related revenue, livestock, power generation, flood control, and so on. The Umatilla, a relatively small one, but again, it's a significant revenue generation for that small area. Okay, another thing about Columbia is also it's one of a major route to connect the inner part of the Pacific Northwest to the ocean. So we have about 8 locks. It goes from the main Columbia River to the Snake. And with this navigation route, we can carry about, I think annually, it's about 50 million tons of cargoes goes through those barges, and which means this is equivalent to like having 3 million trucks. So if you're not carrying it with those vessels, so 3 million trucks or about 8,500 trucks every day to carry those grain from the inner side of the northern west to the ocean. And another amazing fact about this river is the way the dams are built. The dam doesn't hold a lot of water compared to other regions. For example, if you look into the Columbia, this is the annual flow. So the dams in the Colorado River hold about 3 times more than the annual flow. The Missouri, the dams hold about twice bigger, but when it comes to Columbia, we only hold about 1/3 of the annual flow. So the reservoir by itself are not big, but that also is something good when it comes to the fish passage and that kind of issue. So it's relatively, it doesn't affect the flow as much as probably Colorado and Missouri have been doing. And those are, I think, a couple of dams that hold the water, mostly on the upper section of the basin. And another important thing with the dams, this is how the flow was changed over time. So if there was no dams, so this is what's going to be the natural flow conditions. So mostly runoff will be significant during summer, but now because of those flood control dams, we distribute this runoff into early spring, early fall, or early winter and fall season. So we are so there is a criteria. We shouldn't pass the 4,000 because there will be significant flood damage, the 400 mark. So those are distributed into the entire years. This is just to show you how progressively those regulations happens. So initially we have a summer flow is significantly higher. Early in the 80s, the 90s, winter flow is smaller. But as we gradually build the dams, now they are trying, I think it's pretty much, they split it into two seasons. So the summer and the winter now is pretty much, so we have this pretty much similar level of flows going into the river system without having a significant flood risk. Okay, so bottom line is we believe clean and sustainable and inclusive future is possible, especially in our area, having Columbia River next to us. I think if the clean energy project can be successful, I think Washington is in a great position to have this carbon zero energy initiative. INF, I personally believe INF is also well situated, given again the location, our strategical locations, given our affiliation with the industries in the area to push forward this initiative. So how can you get involved? So we're going to have, we will have the e-newsletter that will be distributed on a regular basis. So enroll to those, to our list servers and so on. And tell us what you would like us to get involved. So we have a community room. We have a new building that's open for some community activities. We would like you to come and visit and stay engaged. Yeah, so again, it's one of the assets we have, the community. So we would like to engage with you and everybody else. With that, I wrap up. If there is any question.
Yeah, I have a question about, I'm pretty blown away by the water requirements for thermal energy production. So of the water consumption in the US or maybe the Pacific Northwest, how much of the water is used for producing power? Do you have any sense of that?
It's about, it's about 60, it's more than what the ag is using. So if I have to give you a rough percentage, I would say about 60% of them are mostly it's for cooling the thermal plants.
Right.
But it depends on what kind of system they use. But on average, I would say significant.
So 60%?
I would say 60%, yeah.
So if we are to double our electricity production, then doing it with thermal mechanisms like nuclear would increase our total water demand by quite a lot.
Yeah, if we stayed with the current technology, again, the technology need to improve. In all the systems, they have passing through kind of cooling. So I'm just talking about the water use. The water quality is also another thing. Mm-hmm. So they withdraw the water, cool the plant, and then release it back. Yeah. But nowadays, they even circulate it. So they try to minimize that consumption.
Try to reuse
so technology
it.
Are improving in that way. So there is a room to improve the system, the efficiency of the system.
Good.
So that's one hope. Understanding this nexus will allow us. It's good to address, we need to address the carbon issue. We need to be address that one. But we need to be also very careful of what could that mean when it comes to water resource and other critical resource. I think they were talking about minerals and so on. Mm-hmm. Water is also that part of it. Biofuel is great resource it's in terms of carbon emission, but as a water expert, I'm very skeptic when somebody is too much talking about pushing the biofuel idea, because we haven't yet addressed the water use of biofuel. Till we get there, I mean, at a global scale, it's a lot of other things concern us, because there are a lot of poor countries that can suffer that don't have that much resource that could suffer as a result of that. So it just understanding those interfaces is really important. It doesn't mean we don't have to do it, but improve the technology so you address the water, the current water.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Two questions. One is, out of the Columbia Basin, I've heard that most of the irrigated land comes out of Grand Coulee
Yes.
as opposed to the lower dams.
Yeah, so from Grand Coulee Dam, they pump into Banks Lake, and it flows from there, and then they capture return flows. So basically, water that goes under the system comes out the drainage. That goes back on top of the crop. The further south you get in the basin, the more likely you're getting return flow water. The annual withdrawals at Banks Lake are 3.5%.
14% of the annual flow, yeah.
And then with return flows, that goes up a little bit in terms of total water used.
So the dams downstream, are we drawing water out of them to any significant amounts, like
In the project,
like McNary Dam or
not for the project
John
that I know of.
Dowell's or?
I mean, there's withdrawals from a lot of different dams for other irrigation districts, but not for the Columbia Basin project.
There are some on Snake. Then this is the major, this is where, so Grand Coulee is somewhere here. So this is the major irrigation project.
Okay.
This is the Columbia Basin project. It's the biggest project. And after that, I think McNary is the next one on the main channel, which is to irrigate the Umatilla, but that's not a significant amount compared to the Grand.
But like everything out the Walla Walla is not project water, and everything up the Yakima is not project water. Those are different water systems.
Okay. And then from a systems perspective, integrating the water usage with nuclear and the small modular plug-and-play reactors that are liquid metal cooled, I don't know if you guys have factored that into your equations there or not, but.
So our goal, I mean, the good thing with this group is we have a power person, Noel, and Chad is ag, I'm in water. So we try to bring all our perspective into that. So it's not a separated policy. So how do we bring all those overlapping?
Yeah, and I'll throw one more thing I didn't say on that, you know, potential for increased demand for this water for energy production, for other reasons. Between 1 and 2 million acres of irrigated ag in the West is scheduled to be retired in the next 15 years. Largely California, but also Arizona. Those other 3 big projects that Yonas showed, those are not very sustainable projects. Between climate effects on snowpack in those regions, development effects and the desire to move that water from ag to municipal demands, and then groundwater impacts in those regions. That's a lot of acres of irrigated ag, particularly fruits and vegetables and forages that feed dairy. That's going out of production in the next 15 years, and all those companies are looking here because of our sustainable water supply.
So when you're looking at water use for ag, and people in my firm is interested in it, and there's a lot of land that's subsidized, like down in Arizona and other places, to grow high water hungry crops like cotton and rice. So we're taking desert and making it into rice growing, where we should maybe grow rice up in the Great Lakes region or something like that.
Well, it's essentially what we've done here too, right? It's really dry area that we're using. I think the key difference is down there, and Yonas had that figure, if you looked at like the Colorado, the storage of over annual precip, where we're opposite in the Columbia system. That's the biggest difference, is our annual water supply is fairly sustainable here. So we're not really putting so much stress on that system. But in the Southwest, you know, they have those mega drought problems that those reservoirs just go down.
Yeah, so that kind of policy, I think it's catching up on them, right? So it's a bad strategy to grow, because at the end now Colorado is in a big issue. So that's the reason we are thinking, I mean, Chad is talking, so some of this land is going to be out of commission. This is in the Central Valley.
Really, this one and this one
And then the Central.
are the two that are just the most susceptible to significant change in the next 15 years.
So now people think they may, I mean, this potentially, the original project is supposed to go to 1.1 million acres, the Columbia Basin project, before they start the Hanford. But still, so there are areas for this to grow and probably some.
But if, you asked about cotton, cotton and alfalfa and things like that, but also think about the fact that that's almost all the fruits and vegetables produced in the country out of those systems right there. There's a little bit in Texas and a little bit in Florida, but most of the fruit and vegetable production in the country comes from those 6 spots.
So how does your systems approach, or does it include the aquifer as a source?
We didn't separate. The way I see water is, it's not surface and aquifer. I see them as one entity, whether it's groundwater or surface. For Washington specifically, groundwater may not be a big issue, but again, we would like to make sure there will be no, I mean, most of the Yakima project uses some of the groundwater one, but again, as long as it's water, I don't split them into groundwater or surface hydrology, but we would like to make sure whatever project we are designing, we would like to assess what will be the potential impact on the regional water resource, whether it's groundwater or surface hydrology.
Most of the energy production is off of surface water.
Yeah.
But I think the agricultural production overall, a surprising amount of it is groundwater still. So like Columbia Basin project was planned to be about 50% bigger than it is, and the state granted water rights even though they didn't bring water. And so Office of Columbia River is currently in the process of developing projects to try and address those, right? The Odessa subaquifer. Yeah. Same thing does happen in the Yakima. Theoretically, most of those are drought wells, but they pump, they get pumped on an annual basis too. But it's an issue.
The concern I've had is that the groundwater, the aquifers are a real issue in the southwest of 7 states.
Mm-hmm.
And that's being depleted, and it doesn't replenish itself at the same rate
As a surface.
And that's particularly the problem in like the San Joaquin, and why that particular area is so, it's the state policy that's going to end that irrigation.
My concern is that the Columbia River is a federal asset as well. So how long is it going to be before mega ag in the southwest comes out of the Columbia River?
They already are.
I know.
And actually that's a huge changing question too, is what is agriculture today relative to what it was even 10 years ago? It's not just the mega food companies from the Southwest that are producers, but now it's all the various different institutional investors, the amount of institutional investment that now owns ag land in this state, mostly irrigated, owns operations, owns packing houses and processors now that 10 years ago that wasn't the case. It's a very different world now.
Thank you.
Got time for one more?
Yeah.
So really, really good stuff. I appreciate both of your presentations. Chad, I was curious about the synergy, the symbiotic approach to ag. The fact that we are geographically concentrated in certain areas lends itself really well to this collaborative approach. And I think that's true in a lot of areas, including energy. I mean, for sure in production operations, I've spent the last 10 years or so in biomass, upcycling biomass into biochemistry products, but a lot of opportunities where one production operation is producing biomass, another operation is taking that biomass and utilizing it. There's biochar that's starting to come on big, which then addresses some of the carbon sequestration challenges. But I'm particularly interested in your thoughts on energy synergies. Is there, and I get that there's utility boundaries and so forth, but I see a great opportunity for power purchase agreements among large producers to almost isolate themselves. I mean, I could see a co-op or an energy footprint that speaks for one of the SMRs at Energy Northwest and says, hey, we'll take 800 megawatts of carbon-free power, every day, all day from your next SMR. Like to aggregate that buying power to similar to what Google and Amazon are doing. Is there any, and yet for that to take place, policy has to change. I mean, Olympia would have to pave the way for that to happen. I'm just curious if INEF is looking at outreach, public education. I mean, getting an informed and motivated voter bloc to have political pressure in Olympia to pave the way for some kind of an entirely new energy purchase and distribution, almost a microgrid type of a scenario in this high production concentration zone.
Great question. So I'll
You go
address a little
first.
bit, but
Yeah.
then maybe you could talk about the other faculty lines and how they could participate in this. So, clearly the purpose of INEF is to facilitate and inform policy and inform other developmental activities to try and make sure that we're addressing all the unintended consequences of any decisions that we make, and present and put forward the best options and best strategies and scenarios for the state. That said, we're going to draw that line between the analysis and support and the actual, advocacy role as an institution that doesn't engage in the advocacy role. But certainly, we will, like the Ag Symbiosis report was a really great opportunity. It's the legislature said, we're interested in this, we care about this, go give us some basis upon which we can think about policies and investment decisions that the state could be making to support more of this thing that we think is a good thing.
Yeah, so I think you highlight these issues now, emerging issues. So now we have all this power production. So how do you integrate that in a more cohesive way? Again, as Chad indicated, INF have a lot of activities in educational element, teaching the communities, even at academy level, having curriculums and so on. In addition to that, we are working with another group. They are the energy group, we call them. They are located in Olympia. It's a WSU group. And they are mostly closely work with a legislative group in terms of policies. So we are more of a group that provides this objective assessment of whatever issues they have. And then that group is mostly advocating some of there are 26 entities WSU have. So we'll bring those people together. So whenever there is such initiations are, and then we are a platform to promote an idea that can address the thing you were saying. How do we better utilize our different energy source? Chad mentioned one of the advantage we have is the orchards are so concentrated. So if you generate power there, you can easily incorporate it into the grid system and so on. But this is what INF is all about, is bringing those ideas and have some policy-related influence. Yeah.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chad.
Thank you.